One of the most iconic CDs that really marked a generation of 2D groups and 2D music projects is Trigger's Regality. This is a CD that broke records, that set records, and this is going to be the talk of the day. Let's kick off this episode of SEIYUU Lounge. Welcome to SEIYUU Lounge. I am your host Vanessa, and today you and I are going to talk about Trigger's Regality. This is the CD that changed everything for the Idolish 7 franchise. And this is yet another group that shows that not always the leading group in a franchise will be the one to turn into a massive hit, and not always will be the leading group in a franchise to get crazy accolades. This is really in the same line as Stadish and Quartet Night. Really, the dynamic between Trigger and Idolish 7 is basically the same. At least when it comes to the group with more experience within the story, ends up being the one that actually gets more popular outside of it or among the fans of the franchise. In this case, Trigger was not necessarily because they were really popular, because Trigger and basically the Idolish 7 franchise kicked off in 2015, and back then there were already some idol groups or idol projects surfacing. And basically it was in 2015 that many idol projects surfaced or launched. You got Ensemble Stars, Side M, you had Idolish 7, you had Tsuki Pro. That is not necessarily pop music, but it has some groups that are basically within the pop genre. It was a year in which many 2D music projects made their debut, but for Idolish 7 it took them 2 years until they made history. Not necessarily the franchise itself, because the franchise of course grew in popularity over the years, and by 2017, when this CD was released, Regality by Trigger, the franchise was already picking up quite a lot of attention in Japan. Many people were paying attention to this franchise because it was not only a franchise about idol music, it was a franchise about portraying realistically how the music industry works, the behind the scenes deals, the mind games, the frustrating stuff that idols go through that many people do not know, and they assume that idols are happy because they have fantastic lives, and when the cameras are turned off and the curtains are closed, they are living hell, basically. Idolish 7 as a franchise is really good at illustrating that side of the industry that not many 2D music projects really dare diving into, or really try to fantasize or romanticize that and make it sound like it is all magical and stuff like that. And in this case, they try to portray as realistically as possible within an anime, first a game and then an anime series, what is really the life of an idol, everything else that goes behind the scenes, and all the people that help make a group being what it is and the popularity that that group may get. Of course, the group that we are going to talk about in this CD is not necessarily Idolish 7, the leading group in the franchise, and really the group that gives the name to the franchise. Although they are amazing, they never managed to pull off what Trigger did. And the big reason why I'm going to talk about Trigger's Regality is because this CD broke a barrier that SEIYUU, male SEIYUU or even 2D groups had, which was none of them had managed to come this close to getting number one. Actually, to get number one on Oricon's albums chart, the most difficult chart to basically rank number one. At least back then. Now, for example, Hypnosis Mike has done that many times, getting number one on that chart. But back then, up until 2017, no 2D music project had managed, or 2D group had managed to get a number one on Oricon's albums chart, or weekly albums chart. And we are talking about the albums chart that includes K-pop stars, J-pop stars, rock stars from abroad. It includes all artists. This is not an anime type of chart. This is basically a 2D group against real, let's put quotation marks in here, real artists, and some of those ridiculous popular out there. In this case, Trigger went against, and let me tell you how crazy this is. Trigger got number 1 on Oricon's albums chart in front of BTS, which is easily the most popular group in the world right now. And back then, they were basically on that path to becoming the most popular and well-known idol group in the world. I'm not even going to say K-pop act, because undeniably they are the most popular K-pop act in the world, but they turned into the idol group that is basically known everywhere. And Trigger, for many people, out of nowhere, got that number 1, stole it from BTS and from Hiroyuki Sawano. You might know as the composer of all the soundtrack for Shingeki no Kyojin, or Attack on Titan. Trigger managed that feat, and they were number 1 basically on every single day there was during that week. People were watching that with a lot of attention, especially after what Quartet Night had managed to do a couple of months before. Let me tell you that Quartet Night were the very first 2D group to get a number 1 on Oricon's singles chart, which is completely different, but still really competitive and really tricky to get a number 1. They got a number 1 against SHINee, which was crazy. Yes, another K-pop act. And Trigger went against BTS, which in my opinion makes it even trickier and even more impressive, because BTS is a really big group, and back then they were already a really big group. They were really getting big in Japan and getting really big worldwide, and they were selling a lot, and Trigger arrived with one of the most heart-wrenching chapters in the game, and that CD tied up with the story that was really, really sad and frustrating for Trigger and for fans of Trigger. And they arrived with a CD that tied up perfectly with that specific moment in that story, and it shot through the charts and it went to number 1. It was so amazing. I remember this so vividly, because it was the very first time that I, as someone that runs a website about male seiyuu artists and 2D groups, it was the very first time that I was accompanying such an event so closely with all other fans. I was really reporting every day the daily charts, as I was really thinking, this is going to be amazing. Something really, really unique is going to happen if this group maintains that number 1 until the end of the week. They are going to get number 1 on the chart. They are going to make history. Of course, this was a bold claim when I started to report these, and I remember using even a print of Soma Saito covering his mouth in shock when I saw for the very first time the daily chart and Trigger were number 1 with Regality. I was thinking, this is crazy. What is happening? Why is this CD number 1? I hadn't heard or listened to this CD back then. I even took a couple of weeks until I listened to this CD. I had a lot to review back then, so this CD went to the queue for me to later on review, and I was so impressed with what they were doing. This is one of those moments, and I said this during the episode about Quartet Night's God Star. It's one of those moments in which a franchise and their fan base got together to do something really, really awesome, and even fans of other 2D groups were seeing this happening, and they were helping, they were contributing to this group to really get that number 1. This was history in the making, and not only fans of the group that usually do not purchase the music were purchasing the music, but also big-time fans were purchasing a lot. Some were purchasing more CDs than they even can hear, but still there were people outside of that were getting really curious about the CD and why it was charting really high, and they ended up purchasing the CD and claiming, really, this is a fantastic pop album. Even if you do not know that this is from a 2D group, this is a fantastic pop album. I really could introduce this album to anyone and people will assume this is by an idol group. And they wouldn't even think this is from a 2D group with fictional characters voiced by voice actors, professional voice actors. This is crazy how good this CD is. And at that time, as I said in the episode about Quartet Night's God Star, not many people were still thinking or looking at 2D music with good eyes. And they thought that, well, people are playing around, these are just character songs. No. when people, and especially fan bases, can get behind the story and can get really invested in a story, in this case with Trigger, or really invested in the group and want to take it to greater heights like they did with Quartet Night, you can get really awesome things. And those two CDs are good examples of, in the case of Quartet Night, how a fandom can take a group to fantastic heights and break records, and for Trigger, how a really good story moment tied up with a CD can do amazing things. People were genuinely invested in the story. They were feeling those emotions that Ten was really showing for the very first time within the story. He was crying because of something that shouldn't have happened. And that was something that was putting their future basically in a weird state. All that hard work going down the drain. It was frustrating. It was really, at the same time, shocking to see a character that didn't show many emotions up until then, showing those emotions and being so passionate about something that he liked, and people were really feeling the pain in that performance. Kudos to Soma Saito for an awesome performance, but also to the writers for making sure that that moment was as impactful as it is. And then you have Regality arriving with Daybreak Interlude, the song that is really pushing for that moment. People were invested, and that investment really gave way to this amazing record being set and door or a barrier being broken. So up until 2017, before Regality was released in September 20th, no other 2D group had managed to get #1 on Oricon's albums chart. This was amazing what Trigger were doing, and the album sold a lot, although not as much as, for example, any other groups in the Utapri franchise. But then again, the Utapri franchise is known for selling a lot, and they have a track record of being a series that has a really passionate fan base for a very long time. And Trigger were part of a franchise that back then only had 2 years of activity. They were really fresh and new, and Trigger were appearing with the really heart-wrenching story and the tie-up CD that made a lot of people go to the stores and purchase, watch the music video time and time again, and really be invested in what was happening. People were feeling the story like it was theirs. It was really, really amazing. It's a big reason why I say that I love a whole lot Trigger. This is a funny story and sad at the same time. I came across Trigger and the Idolish 7 franchise in 2015 when the group and the franchise actually launched or debuted. At that time, I remember checking Secret Night by Trigger, and I did not enjoy the music a lot or at all. And I thought, well, I'm more of a rock person, and even if I love Soma Saito and Takuya Sato and even Wataru Hatano, this is amazing because I love all 3 actors or voice actors in this group, which was really God-given to me, but I was not feeling the EDM type of music, and I thought, well, this is not really my thing, so I'm really going to put this on hold. And I was not following the franchise as closely until Regality was released. I knew about the project, I had checked the music before the debut singles by Idolish and Trigger, and even reviewed a couple of CDs by Rivale, but I was not really feeling the franchise as a whole. Trigger's Regality was the CD that pulled me in for good, and I listened to it from start to finish, and I understood why the music had to be like that, why their concept was all about being sexy, and we're talking about sexy done right, not sexy the type that is cheesy. It is a really interesting, mature type of sexy that Trigger have going on in here. And I was really drawn to their music, starting from this CD, and really got really into the Idolish 7 franchise to the point that right now, if we exclude the Dear Vocalist franchise, which is my all-time favorite 2D music franchise, Idolish 7 is in second place as my favorite 2D music project. So, this is a franchise that is really dear to me, and this CD is actually really dear to me because it was the CD that pulled me into the Idolish 7 franchise for good. I haven't left this franchise since 2017, and the group has gotten even better with time. But still, we're talking about Regality, and Regality presented a completely different type of group from what Trigger right now is. And back then this CD was incisive, aggressive, with a strong EDM sound, with a really in-your-face type of approach. It was really sexy and bold at the same time. It is a CD that shows a lot of confidence in this group. This group is really confident in their concept and their ability to pull off that concept. At the same time, the SEIYUU, Soma Saito, Wataru Hatano, and Takuya Sato really showed that they work ridiculously well together. It's insane how a group with very few years working together could sound so cohesive and in complete harmony. Well, it was later unveiled by Takuya Sato that for their harmonies or their sounds to be as cohesive, or their performances to be as cohesive, he is usually the very first to record the songs because he has the lower tone or the lowest tone out of the three, and then Wataru Hatano records, and then Soma Saito basically comes to add the final touches. And that's how you get that sounds that they have, that dynamic in which all voices complement each other, because you have all the voice tones really complementing each other. You have the bass by Takuya Sato, you have the baritone by Wataru Hatano, and you have the tenor by Soma Saito. So they have the perfect vocal lineup because all three cover the three main vocal ranges for men, and then they have a ridiculous versatility by themselves. And when put together, they work really well as a unit. It is quite impressive. It almost sounded like this group or this SEIYUU were working together as singers for a very long time, and they were only working together for 2 years, and they didn't have many songs to their name up until the release of this CD. So it is quite impressive what they pulled off in terms of quality. This CD, of course, has a lot of bangers. It is hit after hit after hit. You have Secret Night and Last Dimension, which were the very first songs released by the group. You have Natsushiose, which is a song that has several versions by now, but back then it had only a Trigger version and an Idolish 7 version. You have Negai wa Shine on the Sea. This is a song that turned into an icon for this group because this song was performed live. It was performed, the intro, as an a cappella by Takuya Sato. It is one of the most iconic live performances that the group has delivered. Of course, it was delivered in 2018, not in 2017. Then you have Leopard Eyes, which is yet another song that was released really early on in their career. Then you have the iconic Daybreak interlude, which is one of the best pop tunes I've ever heard by a 2D group to date. It is composed by one of the most iconic composers in Japan that has worked with TM Revolution, and he made sure that the song is iconic. It is a memorable synth that as soon as it starts playing, you will know immediately which song you are listening to. And then it builds up and builds up and builds up the tension to the point that you get to the outro. And as Soma Saito, Wataru Hatano, and Takuya Sato are harmonizing with each other, you get chills all over your skin. It is a song that will make you want to sing along to the chorus like crazy, shouting it, screaming it, and really raising your hands in the air and really feel those emotions, those raw emotions that go on in the chorus. It is so impactful. It is one of those songs that there's no adjective to put in here unless it is iconic. And then you have the solo tracks. This was the very first time that the Idolish 7 franchise presented solo tracks by its members, and you have Risky Nakanojo, which is a song performed by Takuya Sato as Ryunosuke. This is a sexy song, really explicit at times, and Takuya Sato with his deep, booming vocals, he makes a mess out of you with this performance. Then you have Shiawase de Ite, which is a ballad performed by Gaku, which is to say Wataru Hatano. This is a ballad. It is clearly, if you follow the story, a song dedicated to Tsumugi, who is the manager of Idolish 7, which is the character that you play when you play the game. And then you have You Complete Me, a song by Ten, which continues to be one of those songs that I really do not click with. I can understand its concept, I can understand what it is talking about, who the song is directed to, and everything else, but I do feel like this song doesn't really fit with this CD. It's been years since this CD released, and this is still a song that I skip and really refuse to listen to it because I do not enjoy it at all. I can understand if you enjoy it a whole lot, and I can understand the song for story reasons, but I do not enjoy the sound of this song. And then you have In the Meantime, which is another song that I love a whole lot. I feel like this is an underrated song, but I do fully appreciate it, and I find it so much fun to listen to and just sing along. I find it so addictive. And as pop music goes, this is among the best songs that I've heard, and I do fully enjoy it. Then you have Destiny, which is a quieter song. It is more emotional. It is a quieter way to wrap up this CD, an emotional way to do so, and it really neatly wraps up this CD that started with high tension and high energy, and then it gets quieter as it fades away. It is really illustrative of the moment that Trigger were going through in that specific story chapter and everything else that happened in there. I do love this CD a whole lot, and I can't recommend enough because I do enjoy it a whole lot. I ended up purchasing the CD after I reviewed it because I felt that the CD really deserved to be owned as a physical edition. It is iconic, it is an iconic moment, it is an iconic CD, it is certainly a CD that will continue to be an influence to other 2D groups, to other idol groups, just like God's Star by Quartet Night is. And it showed that a group can be sexy and can do everything they want if the storytelling is really well done. And if the storytelling really ties up with the music and the characters have character, really. They have attitude, they have personalities that are really well defined, and they have stories that they are going through, and that everything is cohesive from start to finish in a franchise that is really story driven. It really can do amazing things, and it goes basically to show that 2D groups or 2D franchises can both be all about the music or all about the fun in various dimensions, and they can also be all about the storytelling and be equally amazing. This is a really awesome CD. Trigger's Regality is in the history books and will continue to be in the history books for a very long time because it was the very first CD to actually rank number 1 on Oricon's albums chart, and it went against BTS, which is awesome. Really impressive what they did on that chart, especially how a fan base really showed how invested they were in the story, that they felt the need to transpose what was happening in the game, and they went on to support the group in real life by purchasing the CD. People were really into the story, and what they wanted to do in the game, which was to support the group and help them, they ended up doing that in real life, and it was surprising, really surprising. And it was at that moment that Trigger really established itself as one of the best, if not the best, 2D group of all time. I'm making a bold claim, but for me, Trigger is the very best 2D group of all time, and there's no question, at least for me. Of course, you may have a different opinion, and of course, you are entitled to have it. Different experiences, different music tastes, and even different projects that you would enjoy, or different characters even, will make your decision be, for example, different from mine. With all being said, this was my take on Trigger's Regality. This is a CD that marked me. This is a CD that pulled me into a franchise that I was avoiding in a way because I didn't fall in love necessarily with the music by Trigger, which was the very first group that I came across in this franchise, and I was not feeling it, but as I listened to Regality, I understood a storyline that I was not even following, and listening to this CD made me want to know what was the story behind it, because what I was getting from it was something really tragic, and I wanted to understand more of it. So it was really well done. It was a CD that captured my attention, someone that was without any knowledge of the story back then, and made me want to know the story to understand the CD more. And I was really enjoying the CD as a standalone without even understanding the story because it was that enjoyable and well done. The mixing and the mastering in this CD is really good, and most of the composers they brought in to create the music in this CD are top tier, which goes to show that really well thought projects can happen and can exist. Of course, it is more expensive to do so, but they can exist and release really awesome music if the project's owners or creators make the effort for that to happen. At the same time, it was really impressive that a group with just 2 years of existence and just 3 story chapters in the game was making this much impact, and with a CD that really tied up neatly a story. This, of course, is one of my all-time favorite 2D music projects, one of my favorite 2D music CDs, and easily my favorite 2D music group. So it is quite special to me talking about this CD, even if there are songs that I do not enjoy in it, which is to say, You Complete Me. So it is really a good CD, but of course not perfect, but still quite impressive. So now tell me, have you ever listened to this album? And if you have, which is your favorite song and why? And do you remember when this CD was charting on the Oricon charts and that moment in which they got the number 1? Let me know in the comments on YouTube and share with me albums you would give everything to experience again for the very first time. I will be picking some of your answers to create an episode covering those CDs. And remember, leave your comments as complex or as simple as they may be, and you can be featured on upcoming episodes of SEIYUU Lounge. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the hand that feeds HQ's weekly mail SEIYUU and music-related content, hit the subscribe button. And if you are listening to this episode on a podcast listening platform, please consider following the podcast and leaving a review. Leaving a review is really simple and helps other people find this podcast and fall in love with male SEIYUU artists and 2D groups. I'll return next week with another episode of SEIYUU Lounge. Thank you for listening and see you guys around.